if I may ask our colleagues who are attending this session to please take their seats so that we can begin with the proceedings for the afternoon. Whilst they are doing that, finding their seats, let me already notify you of the fact that this event is being live streamed in English, French, and Arabic. We do encourage you to please make comments to the subject at hand using the hashtag #ConnectAfrica, and also be aware that there will be simultaneous translations as well in English and French. So the event is being live streamed in English, French, and Arabic. Please use the hashtag on social media, #ConnectAfrica, and please note that there will be simultaneous translations as well. Also, a few house rules before I officially introduce the topic. When we do get to the question and answer session with you as the audience, please may I implore on your goodwill to keep it brief and succinct. So in other words, introduce yourself and ask the question. No pontification, no long statements, just ask the question. And that way many more people will be able to participate. If we're all agreed, please give me a round of applause. I'd love to feel welcome. And we'll get on with it. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome you to the official launch of the report by the UN Working Group and their multilateral partners, a report titled Broadband for All, a Digital Infrastructure Moonshot for Africa. Simply put, this is a report that's looking at the mechanisms, the building blocks, to ensuring that there is universal access for the digital economy for all people on the African continent. My name is Lerato Mbele, and I am a presenter of Talking Business Africa and a few other business-related programs on BBC World Television. And I am an African. And even though I was born and raised on the African continent, I really don't believe that I'm a true representation of the people living in Africa. So why am I saying this? Well, for starters, I'm not under the age of 25. I wish I were, but I'm not. And the African continent, as we speak today, has more than 70% of the population being people under the age of 25. There is a youth demographic that is a very important component to the African growth story. I am a woman, proudly so, which makes me more than half the African population. But for all intents and purposes, I'm a fairly well-educated woman. And that is not the good fortune that the average African woman finds herself to be. We've seen high school dropout rates for women ticking up. And even though many more young women are becoming entrepreneurs and self-starters, at best, our sisters, our mothers are functionally literate, putting them on the borderlines of poverty and suffering all over again. I have a full-time job for BBC World Television, which is not the social security that the average African enjoys. For all of those who are employed, they're either underemployed or they're not paid properly. And so it creates an additional vulnerability for the young African. I'm speaking to you, looking at notes on my tablet, and in my handbag, I have an iPhone. So I am living in the 4G world, whereas 70% of the African population is living in the 2G world. We are not here to talk about me. In fact, we're not even here to talk about you. We are here to talk about 1.1 billion Africans who need to be brought into the brave new world, a digital economy where they can live, learn, and transact. And as we peel through this report, we are trying to identify the tangible tools at a policy level, at an infrastructure level, at an investment level that hopefully will allow us to bring them along into this brave new world. Without further ado, let's look at the contents of this report through this animated video.
The digital revolution has come to Africa, bringing with it a bright future for the world's youngest population. As the leader in digital banking and the fastest growing telecom market on the planet. Economic, creative and business possibilities never before imagined are becoming real. And a device as simple as a smartphone is now a tool of empowerment. But this window of opportunity needs to be opened further to include the changing needs of a vast continent before it slams shut. Though Africa is more wired than ever, only 1/3 of its population has broadband access, making Africa's digital transformation a challenge to grow and expand. But it's possible. Closing the broadband infrastructure gap comes with a $100 billion price tag, as Africa will need to connect 1.1 billion unique users to affordable and quality internet access by 2030. 5 African countries will account for 46% of all the region's projected investment requirements. But no country, big or small, should be left behind, and special efforts will be required to reach the nearly 100 million people that live in remote areas currently out of reach of traditional cellular mobile networks. And an additional $19.7 billion is needed to develop a digital ecosystem, which means education in basic digital skills, and $2.5 billion for policy and regulatory reforms. But it's more than just infrastructure. It's about connecting artists in Mali to teachers in Mozambique. It's about reporters from Radio Television of Djibouti interviewing entrepreneurs. It's about bankers from Cameroon sharing their knowledge across the continent and beyond. Since connecting Africa is smart economics for the world, the millions of young people who enter the workforce each year are ready for the digital transformation that will provide much-needed jobs. Africa still has far to go to provide clean water, housing, education and healthcare. But connecting its countries will go a long way toward bringing these basic services to its people. Africa cannot afford to think small or slowly. Let's make it happen. It will take all of us.
And now I'm going to use the opportunity to introduce you to 6 people who are at the coalface wanting to make it happen, wanting to create universal access for Africa. Before I introduce them, let me remind all of our colleagues who are coming in, this is a live-streamed event. It's live streaming in French, English, and Arabic. Please join the conversation online. #ConnectAfrica. Now let me take the opportunity to introduce to you the first of our panelists, Aurélie Adam Souley Zoumarou. She's the Minister of the Digital Economy in Benin, and she's going to tell us what she thinks about the digital economy for Africa, the transformation that's needed. She has exactly 2 minutes to make her case. Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Lerato. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm coming from a country called Benin, as Lerato said. We are a country of 10 million people, and we're currently going through a profound transformation in terms of how we want our society, our country, to actually take all the opportunity of digital technologies to bring economic empowerment, to bring jobs to our young people, and also using the power of digital technology to actually help our government succeed in terms of transparency, in terms of economic growth, and also in terms of social well-being for our people. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not an easy journey to take, actually, for a country. And as we're talking about access, broadband access for all Africans, I usually say that those people we're talking about, those people we want to connect, they're not usually where we're talking about those issues. The women, the youth we're looking to connect today are not here, actually. It's not about us, you're right, Lerato. So how do we make sure, as policymakers, as ministers, as international development funds, how do we make sure that those people, actually their voices are heard, even though they're not here in the room? This is actually what should keep us wanting to do the best of what we have to do to connect them. And when it comes to, I have 2 minutes, huh? It's up. When it comes to actually connecting people, I would like to share a very short story with you guys. When I travel to Paris, anytime there's this quote from a very famous company, I'm not saying its name, saying you only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. It's all what it is about when it comes to connectivity, in my personal view. You bring people online, but if you do it right, then once is enough. Next time they come online, they don't need you anymore. And that's what I would like us to talk about today, how to bring our people online so that they don't need us anymore to come back online. Thank you very much.
So, Minister, I'll be lenient because you had to be the brave person to begin, and I know that French is your first language. I'm not going to be so kind coming forward. Okay, so the next of our speakers is a perspective from the private sector. Please welcome Peter Ibb. He's the Chief Executive of Bluetown. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here. I'm the CEO of Bluetown, as mentioned here. Our mission statement is connecting the unconnected, and that kind of mission statement gives a special obligation. And therefore, it has been a great pleasure to be part of this whole work with the Moonshot Africa report. I've been asked a number of times from our network, our collaboration partners, etc., regarding the milestones and the ambitions of this program. Can it be done? Can we actually connect Africa 100% by 2030? My own take is this can for sure be done. We are doing this every day already now in Africa. Even though it requires disruptive thinking on a number of areas. On the technology side, we need to think differently. On the business side, this needs to be addressed in a different manner, especially on government side and regulation side. Something else needs to happen that's happening today. And then finally, this is about us joining up across private and public sector. And then, as the last thing here, let's get the funding in place so we can do this. And with that in place, then for sure we can solve this challenge.
Fantastic. Third, I'd like to welcome Doreen Bogdan-Martin, the Executive Director for Telecommunications Development at the ITU.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So much to say and so little time. Ladies and gentlemen, the case for broadband connectivity is absolutely clear. We see the economic and social impact. We know that 10% in penetration rates increases GDP in Africa by 2.5%. We know that the achievement of the 2030 agenda, the 17 goals, will absolutely depend on broadband connectivity. The achievement of the 2063 agenda for Africa also depends on it. We're excited because 83% of Africa actually has broadband plans. That's great. We have 2G signal everywhere, 70% 3G, but, and here comes the but, only 30% online today, as you mentioned, or as we saw in the video. And we're plateauing. We're plateauing. The bottom of the pyramid, those that need it most, that divide is increasing. That's a concern. In 2 weeks, we're launching our facts and figures. We're going to see that the digital gender gap is growing significantly in Africa. Cause for alarm. We're very concerned about that, and we need to really shift, and that's why it's so great we're here today. We have a clear roadmap that this report has laid out for us. We need to shift our thinking. We need to be focusing on the demand side, the skills. We really need to focus on those skills. We need to break those silos, and we need to view this report, as the report clearly says, as an opportunity to disrupt the trajectory. Did I get that right, Doyle? Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you for reminding us not to rest on our laurels. Akim Steiner, the Administrator for the UN Broadband Commission. Please, sir, your time's up. Your time's come.
That's a very dangerous introduction. Thank you, Lerato. And let me just join my colleagues here and also those who will follow in our panel in a moment by responding to your challenge. One big idea that you associate with Connecting Africa. And I think the first big part of the idea is that while we have a long way to go, this is not something that's happening in the future. It is actually happening today. And this is perhaps one of the great challenges in the notion of how do we make development work, not just for some, but for all. You have all in one way or another alluded to it. I think my one idea that I would like to perhaps elaborate a little bit more here this morning is what happens when the broadband connection arrives. Because it is an infrastructure challenge, because without broadband you can't think about that economy, that digital economy and all the opportunities. But, and this is also a lesson we have learned, just having somewhere to plug in doesn't mean you either have the socket, you have the money to buy the socket, just to use an analog image, but also we have to be very conscious of the fact that there is an entire ecosystem that has to grow around that broadband infrastructure. And part of the moonshot discussion that has also come out in the financial estimates here is how do we invest in people's ability in a society that already is unequal, whether it's men and women, whether it's young and old, whether it is the rural population versus the urban population. If broadband is to be an asset to a nation, a society in economic and social development terms, it must already design into the infrastructure thinking the investment in the ecosystem, where startups, where people with different capabilities, sometimes just language. Many of the people we want to be part of this ecosystem did not go to school learning English or French or Portuguese. So how do they become part of this ecosystem? That is where I think many of us, and also we in UNDP, are spending a lot of time thinking carefully right now how to make this happen alongside the infrastructure pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, you're reiterating what the Minister from Benin has said. It's digital inclusion. It's very important that everybody is brought along. The views now from Amani Abdozaid, who is the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union.
Thank you very much. The African Union is the union of 55 states that constitute the continent of Africa. We have one mission. Our mission is to integrate the continent, to make sure that every and each African is woman or man, old and young, we all live in peace, prosperity, and that we are competitive globally. Now we have this technology that opened new doors for us. So for us, it's about not only about broadband reach, but it's about the quality of living. It's about ensuring that our young people are engaged in the global economy. It's about each and every one of us enjoying quality of life. And again, this technology opens up doors, new ways of having electricity, of having water, having transport, not just money. People only talk about mobile money. We intend and we are harnessing it. We are not disrupting the systems that already exist in Africa. We are creating our own systems for the world to borrow. So I have actually a challenge for ourselves. I know that the report here says 2030. My challenge, as in my job, is to make it before 2030. And I know that Africa will do it before 2030, to have this technology harnessed, used, adapted, and improving Africa for Africans before 2030 in a manner that is inclusive, that is affordable, and in an inequality. And I thank you.
Fantastic. Yes. And finally, the Vice President for Infrastructure here at the World Bank, Makta Diop. More of an applause. I feel like the system's a bit rigged there.
Thanks so much, Lerato. Good to see you again. We're talking about 200 million people who need to come online, 9 billion that needs to be invested by 2021, 1 billion new users by 2030, $100 billion to be invested. This is a challenge. We can do it, and we have other means, and people who are here are those who can help a lot in doing that. We're talking about investing in building 250,000 new 4G base stations. We're talking about 250,000 kilometers of fiber optic to be built by 2030. All these are big numbers about infrastructure, about big money, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about creating jobs. We're creating jobs today and preparing our youth to the job of tomorrow. If we don't invest now in those sectors, 5G will come and take all the jobs existing in Africa. IoT will make our youth not available to new jobs, and we cannot afford to do that. If it requires shaking the tree, if it requires changing habits, incumbents in the private sector, we need to accept more competition. Regulators, we need to be pushing the envelope. The government will need to accept to open infrastructure and share it. It's not acceptable that on the continent where you have so many people who need access to broadband, that we still have dark fiber which is available and which is not used because of policies. So everybody will need to chip in. Everybody needs to change his habit, and we will have to really shake the tree. And I think we can do it, and Lerato, I know that will push us to do that. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, so let's just tease away at some of the things that were said. Doreen, you mentioned earlier on that, it makes sense to go into the digital economy because it adds to GDP. I think you gave us a figure above 2%. Other reports suggest that it creates as much as 3% more jobs, and in Europe, it's even above 10% more jobs. So if it's a no-brainer, why do you think the African continent is lagging? It makes absolute sense because there isn't even legacy infrastructure on the continent. Just do it.
Thank you. Well, maybe to start on the positive, I think that Africa gets it, which maybe wasn't the case some years ago. And even I would say to Dr. Amani, she can confirm this, even since January at the African Union Commission meeting, there were still very different groups working sort of in silos. In my view, the stars are aligning. And I think that's a good sign for Africa in the future. I think the case is there, it's understood. And it's great that we have this session here during the fall meeting because we need to be engaging the ministers of finance. This is not something that ICT ministers and ICT regulators can do on their own. So it's really about breaking the silos, working across sectors, and ensuring a whole of government approach that's really going to drive that change and really bring the connectivity numbers up. And bring the meaningfulness that was mentioned by Dr. Amani, making that real impact on people's lives, which is, of course, where we want to go.
Peter, from a business perspective, you use the word disruption, and I know many techies at the moment, whenever I interview them, they say, please do not use the word disruption. In this case, what would it be to overhaul the economies of the African continent? What's required to just the big idea that just gets us there?
Yeah, I think we should distinguish between the larger cities, where we see the telcos already providing quite good coverage and a lot of jobs are being created, etc. And then our key focus from Blue Town specifically, which is about the rural parts of the world, where there's very poor connectivity and where people have very little affordability to buy this connectivity. And in that case, you need basically to turn the business case around, from our perspective at least, because taking money out of very poor people's pocket is just not a good way to make this work. So we need to change it around. And our perspective here has been we need to create a shared value setup where we basically ensure that we come with somebody of something that people need, and we actually afford it based in partnerships with the stakeholders that would like this to happen. So for instance, in Ghana, we're working with CARE. It's about educating the farmers for them to grow the crops in a more efficient manner. And there are very strong people behind that. It means that we can actually offer this connectivity and the services for free for the farmers, and then in return, they start to get a more efficient way of doing this. And then you turn it around. Then we get our revenue instead of taking money from farmers.
Dr. Amani, let's bring you into the conversation here. Africa is made up of 54 African countries. So when we're talking about a pan-African digitization strategy, what do we mean exactly? Because you've got big economies, the Nigeria, South Africa's, Egypt's, with some core infrastructure. And then you've got the smaller nations as well that need to first industrialize, never mind digitize.
We are 55 nations, and we vary through, I mean, in the levels of progress or in the development level, I mean, across sectors, but we're not following, we don't have to follow the traditional path. I mean, I think what you just said reflects maybe a path that was developed in the late 19th century. We're into the 21st century. With all due respect, I mean, I hear lots of, narratives that are, more on the challenging side and negative side. It is extremely challenging. Let me just re-emphasize this. But it's also happening and faster than you think. And what you call smaller nations are doing wonderful things. You just heard from Her Excellency from Benin. I can cite at least 10 or 15 countries also, I mean, that you call smaller, right, that are doing fantastically well when it comes to digital transformation. What it needs is a vision. What it needs is a determination and commitment. It needs collaboration, partnership, and I'm really happy that this panel is here and many more, because we're a large group working, right, together on this digital transformation for the continent. And I'm going to use what Buthaina in a previous panel said, we are moving separately but together. Separately meaning minding the level of development or the level of progress of digitalization in a specific country, but together because we are looking at the same vision.
Makta, Dr. Mani is challenging us here and saying, listen, you don't have to pursue traditional economic models. There doesn't have to be a first, second, third, and then fourth industrial revolution. We can just get there. So when we're talking about infrastructure for a new digital economy for Africa, what does it look like when you're rolling out that capital that the World Bank has pledged, that 25 billion? What are the priority areas?
The priority is to create the incentive to invest. We have seen, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, a slowdown in investment in 4G by the private sector. When you ask the question to the investors, they told us that the taxation is one of the big problems. So we need to have a conversation about taxation of the sector. It will be required to bring our colleagues from the IMF on board, to bring the Minister for Finance, and to bring everybody around the table. And we start doing it. Last year at GSMA, we had a closed-door session where we start discussing it. But we need to enlarge our conversation. So taxation is important for the investors, but also for the consumer. And what Rwanda is doing right now, knowing that the cost of handset is a constraint to increase access, they are now building a factory in Rwanda and trying to lower the cost. But there also, taxation is a problem. Secondly, skills. We need to continue developing skill, but also not to curb the initiative. When you go to Lagos, you have a tech community which is extremely active. You go to Nairobi, that's the same. In Dakar, people are moving. In Abidjan, people are moving. We need to create the space to free those people so that the demand is there, and when the infrastructure is in place, is utilized.
Right.
Let's first free the infrastructure existing by removing the dark fiber and continue creating the incentive for more investment.
Akim Steiner, very briefly, another thing that needs to be done is to just get all the regulators to sing from the same hymn sheet, perhaps. You've got some countries that are liberalizing. We're hearing about Rwanda doing amazing things. And then you've got other countries that just want to protect, and the government wants to lead the process.
Well, as always in development in every nation, there are different, ideologies, sometimes traditions, and sometimes simply experience. I think one of the things that we have learned, particularly on the African continent, which has perhaps one of the steepest curves now in the broadband universe and digitalization, is that many of those who regulate have not necessarily experience in this domain. So the first thing is, how do we learn from one another more? And I think this is where the international institutions are a shortcut for many governments to look at what are the right regulatory frameworks, because regulation is fundamental to enabling things to happen. But then the interesting question is, what are the business models? What are the economies that are built around that? And I think here we do face a challenge, because in the first generation, many of the international companies that own the technology viewed Africa more as a place to make money rather than perhaps invest in a long-term digital economy. And so this is also a maturing on both sides of the partnership that has to happen, and I think we're beginning to see it, and that's where the takeoff happens.
Minister Zumaro, Benin is a small country, but it's a small country with great ambitions to create this digital platform for West Africa in the next few years. Tell us very briefly about the building blocks, the roadmap to get you to achieve this.
Thank you. Talking about the size of the country, yes, the country is a small size country, but we are big from our ambitions. And when it comes to digitalization, there is no small country, because digitalization requires to go through the same pathway, actually. We have a strong collaboration with Estonia, and Estonia, a country even smaller than Benin, has also gone through the same pathway as South Africa or Nigeria or Kenya will go. So that's to say that we have to actually have the right models, the right solution, and that's exactly what we have in our national digital agenda. The building blocks are, first of all, infrastructure building. We actually want to roll out fiber optic, but also other solutions, because it's not only about fiber optics. There are other solutions, maybe affordable solutions, so that we can provide, the private sector or even public sector can provide services at the right price for consumers. The second building block is the ecosystem. Ashim was right. You don't achieve a wealthy digital economy if you don't have a strong and vibrant ecosystem made of startups, made of private sector, made of consumers that are aware that being part of the digital economy is also bringing growth to the country. And then the third part, which I should have talked about first, is actually policy.
Yeah.
We have a strong policy in place currently in Benin, which we call the Code du Numérique, a complete set of regulations, which is actually showing the way on how, as a private company or as a new business, when we want to provide digital services, how you can actually get the right licensing or the right, let's say, the right areas that you can tackle. We're also addressing cybersecurity issues at the same time. as part of this regulation, and which is actually providing Benin today a predictable environment for the digital economy to flourish.
Right. So at this juncture, I'd like to introduce you to two entrepreneurs. I think it's all good and well for us to speak, to research. It matters to hear about those living, breathing the story on the ground. So I'd like to call up to the podium Odunayo Ewenie. She's the co-founder of Piggy Vest, which is a fintech business in Nigeria. And she's going to tell us about how she's been able to innovate in Africa's largest economy.
Hello, everyone. Hi, good morning. My name is Odunayo, and I come from Nigeria. I'm 25 years old, and I run a tech startup out of Lagos, Nigeria. I specified my age because I happen to represent about 70% of the African continent's population. And running a tech startup in Nigeria and across Africa has never been easier, but globally, relatively, it's incredibly hard. Thank you for having me today, and thank you so much for the incredible progress that has been made to bring broadband to Africa. But the question that I would have today is, at what cost? As a startup founder, one of the hardest challenges that I had starting up my business was getting funding. And you realize after you've gone for fundraising once, twice, 3 times, that there is a lot of things that are taking up part of the funds that you've raised in the country. I did some research, and you realize that depending on where you are in Africa, purchasing 1 gigabyte of data can cost about $35. In Nigeria, where we have broadband access, monthly broadband costs can go from $80 for a tiny company of 1 person to my company with 20 people. It costs upwards of $1,000. We have more than 70% of our continent under the age of 35. We have almost half of the number of youth in Nigeria unemployed. Most people are turning to entrepreneurship, but it is incredibly hard when half of the funds that you raise from family and friends, from institutional VCs, has to be spent on getting internet access for your company. And it's not just the cost, it's also the internet speeds. I do enjoy the numbers being quoted. 30% of Africa is online. Are we though? Is 30% of Africa enjoying optimum internet? Because we understand that businesses that use the internet grow twice as fast as businesses that don't. But there are no studies showing how African internet speeds are affecting businesses that we actually do. I'm incredibly happy that the broadband report is out, excited about the efforts that are being made to bring Africa onto the internet, to clear the dark fiber, to give us internet access, to bring us to globally competitive grounds. But how exactly are we going to cater for the people who cannot even afford to be on the internet? Okay. In Nigeria, a country of 200 million people, half of the country exists and survives on less than $1.90 every day. And we already know that, like I said, depending on where you are in Africa, in Burkina Faso, for instance, 1 gigabyte of data is about $35. In Nigeria, 1 gigabyte of data goes for about $5. That's way above most people's living wage. And when you think about minimum wage earnings, data is at least 50% higher than the living minimum wage of the average Nigerian, which is about $50. So when you have to spend $80 on internet for your business, and you only earn about $50 minimum wage in the country, there's a disparity that I think that we need to cover when it comes to the cost and the affordability and the speed of the internet that we are bringing to Africans. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Odunayo. There was a moment there I just thought you're giving us a whipping now. It's hiding. I'd like us to connect now via video link to Regina Honu. She is in Ghana, speaking to us from Accra. She is currently the chief executive of Soronko Academy, and she's a coder. She's teaching young women to code. For her, it's about women's empowerment. Regina, I can hear you from the speakers. We'd like to see you now. There you go.
Hello.
Hiya.
Hi. So thank you very much for this opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion. So much has been said already. All I wanted to add when it comes to teaching digital skills is also the discussion of, bringing the unconnected, but also teaching relevant skills and then sustaining the momentum. I'm actually sad to hear that a report is coming out that will show that bridging the digital gap, it's actually getting worse. And the challenge when you are teaching digital skills, obviously you need internet, you need to go online to upgrade your skills, to keep continuing the practice. So for us, we work across Ghana and Burkina Faso, and we've reached over 10,000 women and girls, teaching them different digital skills. But in order to sustain that momentum, they need the infrastructure. They need to be able to go online and keep practicing. So this is the challenge that we face. When we move from Accra into the regions, then you have less access to internet and people can't really practice. But then once they have the skill, the question is what happens next? How do you translate that skill into a viable business, or how do you use that skill as a value add into any organization that you're going to go into? And for most organizations, the markets are looking for mid or senior level developers, So we're seeing a big boom in terms of the entrepreneurship or digital ecosystem, but the challenge is sustaining that and also getting more women and girls to be able to use their basic skills, develop those skills when they go home. Because what we have is we have a lot of the women and girls learning different coding skills at the academy, but how do they sustain it when they go home? Because they may not be able to afford to go online, or they may have to go to the internet cafes, and that is a danger issue if you go at night, or even changing the mindset of parents to understand that there's value on a girl using a computer. But aside that, talking about bridging the gender gap, I also wanted to ensure that we talk about the disabled community as we're trying to bring, different communities online. How do we ensure that this broadband access, we are thinking about policies for those who are differently able? So for example, we work with deaf and autistic children also, and there's one story I want to share about an autistic boy who is a savant. So he can, if you tell him any date, he can tell you the day, and all he was destined to be was a basket weaver when he wants to be a web developer, but there was not no support there for those skills. And another lady who has cerebral palsy, and we have a great example for Rita, but there was another lady who wanted to learn but didn't get access to the infrastructure, even somebody to teach the skills.
Okay.
So for me, I think it's important that as we're talking about cost, we're talking about skills, and what happens next once you gain those skills? How do you translate those skills into either a viable business or add value to an existing organization?
Regina, thank you so much for your input, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon in Accra. So, ladies and gentlemen, here are young people saying, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, but here's the reality on the ground. We need better infrastructure to reduce the cost. If getting your gigs is going to cost you $35, that's steep. How to get around the problem?
First of all, really fantastic presentations. And both presentations by women, both from West Africa. It tells you also about despite the serious challenges, about how dynamic our young people are, how creative, how their ability to overcome challenges and to work in this environment. We never said that we solved all the problems. Now, for the infrastructure, there is a large infrastructure program for the continent, including ICT, and this is one of the ways, that we are trying to reach also areas where there is no internet, basically. Remember, most of the countries we talked about here are around the peripherals of the continent. You have the center of the continent where there is, a serious problem, because there are areas where there is no internet, and it's extremely expensive, even more expensive than what you heard. So it is crucial that we extend the internet network to make sure that the whole continent is covered. And this is one of the reasons. We talked about this report exists and the initiative exists. The second thing is about money or investment, not now for the infrastructure per se, but it's about the tech company. And that's, again, I think a challenge not only in Africa but across the world. I mean, for banks and for venture capitals and funds to understand the new business model, to understand that here there is ideas or the capital, the asset is in their heads. It's not tangible. It's in here. The asset is creativity and innovation. So even the banks and the financial system is trying to come up with how to deal with that. What I liked very much the presentation also in Ghana, because she raised the issue of people with challenges, and that's important to take on board and to sustain. And the cost, but then again, the AI, and I think AI opens up and is going. I think it's going to be the next big thing in Africa. Yeah. Remember, AI can help us also overcome the issue of language. To talk to people in their own language, whether local or national. It's very important, and I think it opens new doors for the country.
Does anybody else want to respond to what's been said? Two important issues: the speed, adding to the costs, and then secondly, the digital ecosystem was something that was raised. So this is where, as the commissioner is saying, the venture capitalists can come in and help these startups to scale up. But to be frank, some have come in, stolen ideas, developed them in Europe, and then brought them back as e-commerce business in Africa. Just say.
Point, Lerato. First, the African investors need to invest more in the sector and move a little bit more out of the traditional sector. I work in Kenya, and the story that was told is that people have intellectual property is becoming a serious problem. You have a lot of startups, we create a lot of new product, but when they raise money to reach a capitalization of $1 million, they're stuck. And what happens is that people come from Silicon Valley, buy their business, and make. And I think that there is a proposition here to have more investors which are wealthy in Africa to move a little bit out of the traditional brick-and-mortar type of investment to invest in the digital space to support these startups. That's one point. The second point is we need to have more conversation between this group of people and policymakers. I know that it happens in a lot of countries, but not as systematic. And each of us have to play a role. We are, the World Bank, going to country preparing diagnostic. Maybe we should do a better job to make sure that those diagnostics are largely discussed and shared between this community of young investors and the government. So one commitment that we will make is that now when we have a diagnostic in a country, we will not discuss it with the government only and concert with the rest of the society, but we will have tried to foster a public debate around those diagnostics. Last point for me is the story of energy. And there are a lot of similarity. Energy was expensive, was not good quality in Africa, and there were some monopolies which were controlling it. It resonates a little bit of what we are seeing in some situations. So I think we need to learn our lesson from there, and we are moving that direction. In the UN Broad Commission that Doreen and Dr. Amani are members, I was sitting next to a regulator in Poland, and they developed a tool to measure the quality at the end user of the thing. So we take this product and we will try to deploy it in most of the African countries so that you can control quality.
Doreen, briefly.
First of all, thank you to our friend from Ghana. I mean, certainly, as we can see, you've inspired us and challenged us, and clearly a demonstration of there is no lack of talent in Africa, lots of talent, and you certainly demonstrate that. I wanted to pick up on your point. You know, we say half the world's connected and a third of Africa is connected, but it doesn't mean that they're really connected, as you were saying, in a meaningful way. And so we shouldn't assume that we're done with those parts of the world or those people that are connected. There's a lot more, as you rightly said, and so that's a challenge for all of us on the speed side, but also on the affordability side. And in Africa, I think there's only 7 countries that are actually meeting currently the target that we have in the Broadband Commission. It's prohibitively expensive. Maktar mentioned the devices. We need to do much more to bring down the cost of services.
Fantastic. What I'd like to do now is call on 4 people who are in the audience, and perhaps you can, as experts in this field of digital economies and tech, you can perhaps tell us what we're missing from this conversation. So if you can just stand up as a group. You are Belinda XLB from GSMA. You're Robert Pepper from Facebook. You're Jose Toscano from Intelsat. You're Yinka Adegoke from Quartz. So in less than a minute, tell us what else we need to think about.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'd like to congratulate the World Bank and the Broadband Commission on this great report. For us, the value of the report is very much that it not only scopes the size of the challenge as a whole, but it breaks down the component parts of the challenge that we have in connecting the whole of Africa. As so many have mentioned, it's not just about infrastructure anymore. In fact, globally, 4/5 of those people who are not using the mobile internet now are actually covered by 3G and 4G networks, but they're not using them for the same reasons we've heard around affordability, around lack of digital skills. And this report breaks down those segments really well. And very quickly, my final point is around gender equality. I'm working with Doreen as part of the Equals Initiative on Gender. This is drawn on the report very strongly that the gap is actually broadening, the digital gender gap in Africa. And I'm really excited that the World Bank Digital Development Partnership is going to be working with Equals on the next phase of a project to drill down on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Belinda.
Thanks, Robert Pepper at Facebook. So again, congratulations. What I find really exciting about this is it's not just an agenda, it's an executable roadmap. And there are things very concretely to be done. You know, those of you who know me, I'm an optimist, but I'm an impatient optimist. And I think that there's a lot to be done. So one of the 2 things that actually are coming out of this. One, and it's a great, for those who haven't read it, looking at Chapter 5 on policy, some of the policy issues that were raised that actually are going to lead to more collaboration and partnerships across the board that's leading to more investment. The kinds of things that we're doing on fiber backhaul in places like Uganda and the DRC. Second, there is a detailed discussion of how to make devices more affordable. And we believe that there's about 250 million people, 240 million people in Africa who are covered by mobile broadband who cannot afford devices. If we can even crack half of that, we're looking at 120, 130 million people in the near term, and we're partnering with the World Bank on trying to figure out new business models to do that, and that's going to also take new policies. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As I'm not an English speaker, you will give me the double of the time, I hope. Thank you very much. So firstly, congratulations to the World Bank, congratulations to the Broadband Commission. Thanks very much to the World Bank for the leadership of this working group, which made it possible to have this report. Also, I want to congratulate and to thank all of you, congratulate our colleagues from Nigeria and Ghana. You made my life very easy because, in fact, you raised the points which I was going to raise. 1 year ago, we embarked on this journey. Today is a milestone. We are completing the easiest part of this journey. At the same time, the most difficult aspect is going to start now. How do we go from a report to real facts, to implementation? How do we implement the financial models, new financial models that are crucial to create investment also from the private sector? How do we change regulations and policies? We are doing a lot of projects in Africa, and regulations and policies are a clear impediment to what we are doing. Licensing fees are not possible. When we want to do some specific projects, those licensing fees make us decide we are not going to do it. How are we going to implement what needs to be done in terms of affordability? Devices, access to the internet, price of the access to the internet. How are we going to promote digital literacy and development of local content? Africa is a continent where we have three main languages: English, Portuguese, and French. How are we going for Arab? Sorry, I forgot it. I don't speak Arab, so that's why I forgot it. How are we going to promote development of this local content? How are we going to ensure the involvement of the local communities? Without the involvement of the local communities, a project will not be successful. And we have got that from the experience of specific projects that we are doing today. We are very excited at Intelsat to work with you and to continue to implement projects where partnership is a key element for us. We are partnering with UNHCR, for instance, to provide connectivity and access to education to refugees. We are partnering with the public sector to provide access to villages, to provide access to schools. So you have our full commitment, because I believe that if we work together, we'll be able to achieve it.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
And if you could pass the microphone over to Yinka.
Thank you very much. Like everyone else has said, congratulations on this report. Excuse me. As a journalist, when you get reports, you get a lot of them in your inbox and your eyes tend to glaze over. You know what I'm talking about, Loretta. But this one actually excites me, because it really drills down to the thesis of what my publication is about, Quartz Africa. We focus a lot on innovation and innovators. I was very proud to have Odunaya speak up there today, because she was one of our 30 African innovators this year. And the thing about pushing innovation and talking about how this will improve and push the new Africa as part of the new global economy is it doesn't happen without digital technology. It doesn't happen without understanding, without affordable internet, without internet reaching many people. I suppose if there was something that I haven't yet heard in any, some detail, although it's kind of been touched on, it's really about the ambition for how internet brings jobs. Because as we see more digital technology around the world, in more advanced economies, it hasn't always been supportive of more jobs. It's actually taking jobs away. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much to you, Belinda, Robert, Jose, and Yinka, for your submissions. And just before I throw the questions to the panelists, can I, by a show of hands, get a sense of how many members of the audience have questions of their own? If you've got your questions, 1, 2, 3, if you could make your way to this microphone in the aisle, and then we will come to you shortly. So the 3 hands that came up, if you could just, we'll try to make sure you don't stand for too long. No, I will let you know when you can ask the question, but just be on standby. So some of the issues that were raised very briefly, the gender equality issue has come up again, and in fact we're hearing that the gap is widening. You cannot, on a continent where women continue to be the face of poverty and inequality, throw another jeopardy at them. How are we going to get this right?
I can say a word on this, Roto. To me, the women issue in digital technology is strongly related to affordability. When a digital service is not affordable, then it has a strong risks that women living in our communities, African communities, will not afford to use that service. And we're seeing it on the ground. Usually, when you know, in Africa, rural communities, rural areas are like 65%, and urban areas like 35%. So recently we did a work with the World Bank, starting a new project on e-agriculture. And what we found out is that in those rural communities, there are smallholders, women smallholders, farmers, who need to have access to market, to have access to information on how to actually improve their productivity, and they couldn't get access to it, even though they are within a coverage of a network. And Belinda was right, saying that actually you have plenty of people, especially women, being within a coverage area of a network but not using it. So to me, it's very important, and that's what we actually trying to achieve with this project with the World Bank, to address that kind of issue. And in that front, I would like also to emphasize the work that is being done regionally. Connectivity is not only about how a single country is tackling the issue, is how are we doing it regionally. Okay. The African Union is helping with some initiative. Smart Africa Alliance is also doing a lot, and we are currently building an intra-African network so that we're able to go and buy in bulk, like capacity, making price costs actually down, and giving affordable services to our people. So it's really important to address the affordability issues when it comes to bringing women online.
Did you have something to say? Yes, please, Akim.
I think what is so fascinating in the extraordinary transformation, you didn't want to use disruption. I think in some ways the term transformation is much more appropriate to capture what is actually happening, not only in Africa, but particularly in Africa when it comes to broadband and the digital economy, is that it's not inevitable that inequality has to grow. It's a product of not being able to design that transformation in a way that is more inclusive, because there are thousands of stories that actually show that for women, for example, the ability to take advantage of the digital finance revolution suddenly enables them to actually exist financially, where before they were non-existent because of the way that the banking system worked. A woman today in a number of African countries can borrow, who is working in a market, money in the morning on her cell phone, buy the vegetables or whatever produce she wants to sell, go to the market, sell it, repay the loan in the evening. Artificial intelligence makes that possible, and it has brought the price down, it has brought the barriers down. Rural economies, young people that we just listened to, all of them are examples of having actually reduced inequality. But you need to design the whole regulatory framework, but also the way that investors and companies make that group part of the business case. Because if you only take the top 10%, then you're actually going to exacerbate inequality, and digitalization could end up becoming a problem rather than an asset.
I want to move the conversation along. Something was said about the affordability of devices. And I know we're already starting to see assembly plants in Ethiopia. We've just heard of the Mara phone in Rwanda. What needs to happen on the manufacturing side to make these devices affordable so that people can transact and use them more effectively? Anyone?
Just short comments to that. Actually, what we see when we deploy our solutions in the rural areas is that the device part, it is a challenge, but actually second-hand and used devices, they tend to find their way to these areas. But it's the chicken and egg. Until there's actually something meaningful to use it for, until you can see that it can benefit yourself job-wise, etc., then the phones, they don't end up there. So it's part of that.
We'll give Ashish Taka a year, and then we'll invite him and see how that's going. And then the ambition for jobs. I was curious because research shows that digitization actually improves the prospects for jobs. But what kind of jobs are we talking about, and perhaps what kind of skills are needed to help people make that leap?
Yeah, just adding to what was said from Benin regarding women's rights and gender equality, I just mentioned a real-life example. We're running a program with USAID in Mozambique at the moment, which is exactly about handling the gender equality challenge while creating jobs. So while we deploy our connectivity Wi-Fi hotspots, we find local female entrepreneurs that get responsibility for running their own small business based on the connectivity. So first of all, they get their own job. They sell data packages and make a living out of that. But they also become our ambassador, handling the skill challenge that people have in these villages because people don't understand what the internet is all about. So you can do it actually in a combination.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So Thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel. I would like to follow up again on the question of inequality, because most youths and women in Africa, majority of them are located in rural areas where there is no accessibility, where there is no infrastructure. If our aim is to reach universal broadband access by 2030, what are some of the mechanisms that we have put in place specifically to target the youths and the women in rural areas? Because we seem to be concentrating more in urban areas. Do we have ways of having partnerships with the schools in rural areas where youths have access to them? Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Ingo Tulukonga from the International Monetary Fund. I have 3 quick questions. The first one, SMEs account for almost 90% of all businesses across the world, and they are recognized to be the source of employment and innovation. But what we are seeing, although of course some of the speakers already touched on some of the constraints, what we are seeing is that the SMEs, the consumers, the government, the banks are moving on with digitalization, but the SMEs are not really picking up. They're still lagging behind. Could you comment on some of the other constraints that are constraining the SMEs, and how can we get them to actually adopt digital technologies? Related to that, internet operates on electricity, and across Africa we are seeing an unreliable supply of electricity. How much of a constraint is that in your business? And the last one, we have seen a divide between the fixed broadband and mobile broadband. Mobile broadband is growing very rapidly. But for small businesses, do we need to go back and invest in the fixed broadband? Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Mubarak Osman from Ghana. It is very clear that internet accessibility in Africa is very low. I want to ask this particular question, and I need a very brief answer.
Thank you.
What is the strategy to getting Africans, particularly the rural African, access to broadband internet services?
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Just before I close the questions from the floor, anybody else? It's going, it's going, it's gone. And may I ask Danielle to make her way forward to read us what has been said trending online. So let's start with the last question, because I think it's an important one. Here we are talking about less than 15% internet penetration after so many years. Where do we even begin with this one?
We always portray as if it is a failure. Let us remember that it's not so long ago that even the use of cell phones in the technology centers of the world was something new. Africa is just a little bit behind, but in many respects, and Dr. Amani will speak to that, I'm sure, in a moment again, actually ahead. So let me just say one thing about the rural areas, just to answer that question. What we now see in Africa is, again, very different examples. There are 3 fiber optic providers in a provincial town in Kenya today. They create the opportunity for those who essentially are impoverished by having to survive in the capital and often living in slums after they have just spent a lot of money on their education. They can now go back to those provincial towns where their families are, build up businesses. This is not insurmountable. Again, what I want to emphasize is we can lament the current state, but actually we are neither powerless nor are we without opportunities. And I think it's very important to answer the question. The future for many people in terms of broadband connectivity, the digital economy, jobs and incomes is actually in the rural areas.
I just wanted to challenge you a little bit there. We're not a little bit behind. I mean, the broadband report suggests that half the world right now, half the world, has access or some kind of connectivity. We're talking less than 20%, and I'm even being quite ambitious in that target in Africa. It's not a little bit behind, it's a lot behind.
Just to say, if you were to ask Chancellor Merkel today, she gets a lot of stick from her rural areas in Germany about connectivity. So we're talking about periods here, and the Africa curve is exponential and steeper than many of the countries that we traditionally refer to as OECD countries. So the catch-up has begun, but the critical part here is how do we shape this? Because it can go wrong also for many people who might be left behind.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, because I think you captured the essence of what I wanted to say. It's not a failure, it's just that we are optimistic and impatient optimistic. Technology, as we are seeing it in Africa, provides answers to so many things. You mentioned Kenya. It's also the same technology that allows us to have a decentralized, off-grid, mini-grid electricity in rural areas. So for us, it has a different or deeper meaning. But I would like to link that. I mean, you're saying 30% of the continent is disconnected. But if you review my previous interventions in any of the fora, it is also closely linked to energy. Let's remind ourselves that more than half of the continent does not have access to energy. This is not a different story. It is at the essence of and at the heart of the debate. And the same investments we are calling for now, I mean, to invest in digital, better go, and I would say to energy, because without that, your phone, whether it's cheap, whether it's expensive, would not work. Your internet will not exist. The connectivity has absolutely no meaning. So energy is very important, and I'm always very, how would I say, well, I sound aggressive, but I am aggressive when it comes to that. Energy, people forget that energy is in the background, and somehow we don't talk about it because we are so fascinated by the digital transformation, and we should be.
Right.
But remember, again, the issue about energy. And I just wanted to, someone was talking, one of the questions was about rural areas, how to connect, where it doesn't. You know, one of the examples, again, about innovation is postal services. Remember, we have a post office in a village. And now what we are trying to do at the African Union, in addition to what we're doing together with Smart Africa, with the single digital market and the shared points, you know, the exchange points and so on and so forth, is that to equip at least these postal services with electricity and with connectivity so as to act as a hotspot for a whole village. Here's an answer. Now, how many, and I'm challenging also all the development organizations who are here present, starting by the World Bank, now how many are willing to work with us, you know, in order to equip these postal services, the post offices, which exist across 35,000 of them exist across the continent. Okay. Why don't we make use of them, you know, in this digital era and transform them into something completely different, but useful?
Doreen, Magda, I'll come to you.
Just quickly, I mean, to follow on from the last gentleman's question in terms of, you know, what's the strategy? I think the report articulates clearly the roadmap. We have the 7 steps and the different interventions that need to happen. But we also need to keep in mind, and I think the report reflects this well, that it's not business as usual. We need to be creative. We need to find innovative solutions. And we do have a lot of innovative technological solutions, even in areas where we have no electricity. But coming back to the point on inclusion, and Akim, you mentioned the word design. We need to remember that we can't just be sort of imposing technology and assuming it's going to be taken. It's about ensuring that what people need, those that are furthest out and not connected, what do they need? How do you include those communities in the design and the development of content so that when they are connected, it's actually beneficial?
Magda, a lot was said about pairing the physical infrastructure, broadband, with electricity.
First, we talk about the report, and everybody finds it's a good report. I would like to recognize 2 of my colleagues who have been really, as Doyle and Butena, who have been really playing. If you want to stand up for people to know that you've been the one who have been really doing the hard work from the World Bank side. I'm just a mouthpiece for them. This combination of many things, I fully agree with you that energy is a solution. Not only that, but when I'm talking about dark fiber, this is exactly energy. Every time you have a post, you can put fiber optic at the same time. So what you're trying to do is to push really country to think in a holistic way when they are doing their program, energy. We have another policy that pushing dig once. By building a road, dig systematically and put fiber optic that will accelerate. Technology is changing. a private company in Kenya now is using air balloon to give services to people in rural area. So we have multiple elements happening, and it will happen and be accelerated. On SME and rural space, things also are happening. In Niger, they have now smart villages. They're pushing for smart villages. So I think that what we need to do is two things. Share experience, learning. Niger, talk to Benin, Benin, talk to Indonesia, Indonesia, whatever. Learn, and that's very valuable. We had a session on ID for all, and it was very powerful, the knowledge sharing between countries, peer-to-peer learning. Secondly, languages. We talked about Arabic, we talked about French, we talked about English, but we don't talk about Swahili. If we want women to be accessing it, we need to do it in national languages also. In Hausa, in Wolof, in Swahili, all our national languages where there is now enough development. When I go to East Asia and I ask the question, why do you have a search engine which is so specific to your country, or why do you have an app for communication? Why don't you use WhatsApp? The reason is that because the language they're using is not the language that is used in those applications. So they developed in Korea, they developed in those countries specific application, and that helped develop an ecosystem. So we need to integrate all those dimensions if you want to create the impact that you are talking about. Roger.
We've got 3 minutes before the end of the session, so I'd like to ask Danielle, I will come to you, to read to us some of the comments that are coming through from social media, and then Jose, you can say something. Go.
Excuse me. I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Yes, ma'am.
No, there was just one question about the fixed internet that was not addressed.
Okay, yes.
I would like to touch on it. It's true that currently in Africa you have a tremendous growth of mobile internet. Especially in Benin, we have like 48% internet penetration, and it's 48% mobile internet penetration. Fixed internet is very small. Yeah. So in terms of what could be done, that was a question. What we thought could be a good strategy to grow the fixed internet sector is actually through policies. What we currently doing actually is to bring the licensing regime from having a full licensing option to like a simpler authorization regime for internet ISPs. Okay. And we also brought in the fact that you can be an ISP for a specific zone, not only nationwide, but for instance, for a single community, a department, or even a single town. So we currently, through the process of evaluating this, operation it and evaluate, but we actually confident that it will be a way to bring the fixed internet penetration higher than it is now.
That's a fantastic submission. Okay, Danielle, very quickly, what are they saying?
Thank you, Lorato. We've been taking the pulse of the event online, and a couple of things have come up that have already been discussed, but the big one is access to energy. There's concerns about connecting Africa if there continues to be large gaps in access to electricity. The second one is cost. That's also been discussed at length, but young people continue to find the cost prohibiting when it comes to starting and running a thriving business. And finally, the third one is data privacy. Some are asking, what are we doing about the privacy of data that will be collected by the increasing number of Africans that are brought online? So back to you.
Okay, so that's something I think we can all think about. As we wrap the session up, yes, ma'am, you can say what it is you want to say.
At the African Union, we have a convention for cybersecurity and data protection, and there's only 3 countries who ratified it. I don't know how, but anyway, we are pushing with a large program for a large initiative for awareness and sensitizing countries, to come together and to understand that this is crucial. As we move in the digital space and the cyberspace, it is crucial that we protect ourselves, we protect our people, we make sure that individuals' data are protected, but that we can also, I said it in the earlier session on digital ID, there's also the issue of interoperability. We want to make sure that we are using the same standards for data protection and cybersecurity.
Okay, as we wrap the session up, I'm going to speak slowly so that it gives your brain time to work. Think of 2 or 3 words that will define the environment for connectivity by 2030. Just 2 or 3 words that you think will already shape the framework and that roadmap by 2030. Go.
Young people, partnership, and interoperability for integration.
Fantastic. Magda?
Vibrant, inclusive, young.
Fantastic. Hakim?
Governance, the dynamism of the young, and the prospect of the unknown.
Fantastic. Doreen?
Accessible, empowering, and inclusive.
Fantastic. Peter?
Equal opportunities.
Fantastic. And Minister?
Partnerships. It's all together that we can achieve this.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been us launching the report. Thank you for your time.